So for everyone who's just joining us, thank you. And we are doing a series of conversations with faculty and staff on their recommendations for anti-racism readings and resources. So we asked faculty and staff to make recommendations to the library to support our community in learning and practicing anti-racism. And Professor Citlali Miranda-Aldaco is with us today. She made a recommendation that she was willing to discuss with us. And my name is Liz Johns. I am the Teaching and Learning Librarian at the college, for those of you who haven't met me before. So I think we'll just go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask you a couple questions and ask you to share information about the material that you recommended, and we'll just go from there. So Professor Miranda-Aldaco is a professor in the Center for Hispanic and Latinx Studies, correct? And you've been at Goucher for...
Hispanic and Latinx Studies?
Yeah. How long have you been at Goucher?
Well, 14 years in August.
Wow, congratulations. That's a long time.
Oh,
no, doesn't feel like it.
Okay, could you repeat it?
Oh, I missed you.
My connection, yours, one connection is just flaky, or both?
Yeah, I think for me, you're a little delayed, and I might be a little delayed for you. So I'll slow down my speaking. We'll see how this works. But you recommended a book for us called Everyday Anti-Racism, Getting Real About Race in School, correct?
Yeah.
So can you just tell us a little bit about that book to start us off?
Yeah, that book has been very useful for teaching in several contexts. It's used in high schools as well, and I like that book because it contains articles on different groups, different minority groups, and it gives you some lesson plans on how to go about the discussion, because some people are not as comfortable discussing this topic. Sometimes they are very touchy, and so they don't feel prepared. But this is a good way to start the conversation, especially in our classrooms. And it contained a couple of articles on how to modify our vocabulary for the class, and how to refer to other people, etc. And so I try to adjust that into my classes. And it also touches on microaggressions, which is another thing I also wanted to share, the podcast that I heard on NPR. And so they both, the book and the podcast, connect a lot with what's happening in these times, and it connects with what happens in my classes, because we do talk about these very touchy topics. And I want to say that by creating a great atmosphere of trust and communication in the classroom, which is the main purpose of the book, create the conversation, create the trust, and so everybody can communicate, then you educate everybody to be better people in general, but also to create allies, because some of my students in the privileged groups have said, I don't know what to do, I want to help, and I don't know how to go about this. And I said, well, then you become an ally, you educate yourself, and then you continue to educate others, while the minority groups take a little break, and then when they regain strength, continue to educate others, because it's a bit exhausting sometimes to be the one educating the privileged side. But I use that for my classes. And there was this article on the vocabulary part was about the word Anglo-Saxon. And so when we discussed identity in one of my classes, I asked each of my students how to identify how they identify. And so they started telling me, well, I am this and that. And there were a handful of students who said, well, I am Anglo-Saxon. And we were like, what do you mean by that? And so they were not able to explain it. So then we went into educating ourselves, and they educated themselves. Okay, so I don't want to identify as Anglo-Saxon towards the end of the education part. And so they were able to verbalize properly how they identify themselves, so they are not creating a microaggression towards other students or silencing others by identifying themselves as a privileged group without being in touch with the rest.
Of it. Okay. So this book, it's a collection of articles. So it's pulling in perspectives from a lot of different people, right? It's not just, it's an edited collection. And so you mentioned this one article on the use of the term Anglo-Saxon, which I think is really interesting because we don't really talk about that term a lot very much anymore. And I watched this show on Netflix about the Middle Ages in Great Britain. This is completely unrelated, but they used the Anglos and Saxons were very specific cultural groups on the British Isles, and that term seems to have taken on a different meaning in the past, actually like 1,000 years. And it means something very different today than what those terms originally meant. Was there other vocabulary or other articles in there that kind of struck you as using different terms or vocabulary or descriptions of people that we've kind of distorted the meaning over time, similar to that?
Well, the articles there is not the vocabulary that has been distorted, but like now that you mention what other articles is how to talk about Native Americans. So there is a chapter on that, and how to invite diversity into your classes. And so there are many things that you can take, not completely from an article, but then you combine pieces and bits into the needs of your class. And so that's what I pretty much try to do, because it doesn't really fit fully, because our population at Gaucho is not really, doesn't have that many Native Americans. But then you start educating yourself and educating students. And so what does Native American mean? So do Latinos belong to the Native American definition? Because that's also culturally based bias. So Native Americans, many Native Americans speak Spanish. So do they belong to the Latino population or to the Native American population, or both? And so when they are both, what box do they check? So it is a really rich conversation when you start thinking about the vocabulary that we use to identify other people and our groups.
Absolutely.
And that would also I also use that along with the microaggressions one. I'm going back to the microaggressions one, because in the classroom, when we create this community of learning and conversation, we create trust. And so students feel free to talk about certain topics, and we touch on identity, and it does have to do with identity. And that is why the article of the vocabulary came about, when we talked about identity. And so the microaggressions part came when somebody would say something, and then usually towards a minority group. And in this case, we were talking about English, like, oh, you have great English, you speak awesome English. And so some students would, like in the Latinx population, would feel offended, because like, I was born here and I'm an English speaker since a baby. So they find that like disrespectful, and so they have to say something. So we have to educate our students, give them the tools to defend themselves, to educate others. as well as defend themselves. And
Right.
that creates this conversation.
Okay.
And
So it sounds like you've used a lot of the material from this book. Have you do you actually assign readings from this book for your students, or are you just using it for yourself to drive and design these lessons?
well, the book gives you some ideas on how to design your lessons because it gives you lesson plans.
Right.
And within the book, there are some readings that you can assign as part for your
Okay.
class to
For
prepare
your
your
student.
student. Yes, and so thanks to that, you can always assign the readings, and then you create a bridge towards the conversation and discussion. And it's really amazing how much you can get out of students because you can apply the different strategies that you can find in the book and the lesson plans, or you can also bring in other resources and then give them the skills and tools that they need to continue with the conversation and the education.
Absolutely. So I think you've kind of answered my next question a little bit, but I'll just throw it out there just in case there's anything else you want to say more specifically, because it sounds like this material has been really important to you in your teaching. But has it impacted you in your work in any other way, or are there related um, works or resources that you kind of pull to kind of supplement this one?
Yeah, I use some material specifically for my Latin American Studies class, which is where the conversation came about of like, oh, so you speak good English. It was also the stereotypes. We do a lot of reading about Latino stereotypes and Latino stereotypes in media and in books, etc. So uh, we do some reading on that side, and then I ask them to do some research on their own. Give me something else. So this is what I'm sharing with you, and then bring in and let's create a larger pool of information. And so students bring in their own resources. Sometimes they don't find like an article or anything, but they may find something, in their feed, or they share. And it's really interesting because I ask them, if you find a depiction like on a TV program or Netflix, so like, or a movie where it is the representation of the stereotypical view of this person or this group, and they bring me a whole list of stuff, and it's really amazing. And now when we are in class and I just type in, they tell me type in this and that, and so I just type in and they explain. So this is what's happening. So it becomes a very rich environment in which they bring their own perspective and realities and what they see and where they get their information. And so we sometimes contrast it. Well, not sometimes, that's the discussion. We contrast it with the reality. And it is amazing how we have a representative of a given group, usually a minority group, that is being misrepresented by the stereotype. And so then we create that conversation. And fortunately, we have a good sense of community in the class where students feel safe and we talk about it. Sometimes it's uncomfortable and it's like, oh, but they know that we talk about these topics and it's the safest and perfect place to discuss um, touchy topics.
Right. Well, and they're there to learn, and it's a learning space. So if you can't feel safe in a learning space, then where can you feel safe having these uncomfortable conversations? So that's amazing that you pull this into your classes. It seems like it's a pretty regular and embedded part of your work. So what do you think that members of the Goucher community could learn from this material that you've recommended? Oh no, she froze. I don't know if it's me or her. Anybody who's joining us, if you can let me know in the comments. Oh no, we lost her. All right, so I'm guessing it was Professor Miranda-Aldaco who had a spotty internet connection. We'll see if she comes back and joins us. I had one more question for her. So we'll, oh, there she is. Is she coming back?
I'm back.
You're back. Okay.
Yeah, I lost you.
Yeah, I lost you for a minute, but you're back. You're still a little slow. Now you're frozen again. Oh, you're back. Okay.
This is a whole adventure. This is amazing.
I know, being at home, the internet, I make sure I close my windows because I've got lawnmowers and leaf blowers going. It seems like all day, every day. Yeah, so it's definitely an adventure being from home. So my last question to you was, what could members of the Goucher community learn from this material besides kind of what you do with your coursework, thinking kind of outside of the scope of your course? What can other Goucher community members learn from it?
Well, that's an excellent and awesome question, because there is I think it's in that same book, What to Do with Microaggressions, or How to React to Certain Comments. In one of the sections of the book, it mentions like strategies that we can develop to educate people. And so that ties into the microaggressions podcast that I also mentioned before. And one of the questions in the podcast was to ask the person who committed the microaggression, because we are all to blame. Like we sometimes say something that might be not nice to other people, and we just did not realize at the moment, and we need to be called on it. And so it's to ask the question, what do you mean by that? And so based on that relationship that you have with the person, you can start a conversation. And if it is a friend of yours, clearly, I can talk to this person that has just said something, and we can educate each other and talk about it. And so maybe this will not happen again with anybody else. In the classroom, we can do the same. And when somebody says something, the other person can ask, could you elaborate or something? And it has happened in class, and it has been very interesting. When we were talking about a Latinx student said, I don't like going to bars sometimes because people ask me, where are you from? And I just tell them, well, I am from Baltimore. And they go like, no, but really, where are you from? And my student was like, why isn't that enough? Why do I have to be telling people like where I am from when I am from Baltimore?
Right. Why so there was they're from somewhere else.
Exactly. And so many students were like, I understand what you mean. Yeah, it's wrong. And then there was one student who was like, but I don't get it. Maybe they really want to know where you're from. I said like, yeah, but if you say I'm from Baltimore, then that's it. And then we go on in the conversation. But he couldn't get it. So we switched the conversation towards him and said, has anybody ever asked you, where are you from? And he was like, no. Has anybody ever praised your English? No. And so the question was, have you ever wondered why? And so he realized at that moment, because I am a white man. And so it was like a moment, aha moment. And it was wonderful because at that moment he realized so much about his privilege. Mm-hmm. And it was like an education. This is like a teaching moment that you really want to have with many people. And so fortunately, we had the opportunity to share it with the whole class. Many of the women students there were like, yes, okay, so finally this guy is getting it. And so the guys were like, okay, good. So like, it was like, this is the learning community. This is what we want the students to take out into the world to grow. And fortunately, Goucher allows students to do that. And so They get it from the classroom, then they take it outside of the classroom, and then they continue to grow and to create these alliances. Because we need those allies, in every single thing. And so that is what students can get out of these conversations, is the tools that they can use to create a conversation when they are in the minority side, and create this communication, and also balance. Is it worth it for me to take time and effort to educate this person, or I guess my safety is in jeopardy, so I just walk away? So like also a little bit of common sense, and as well to educate our allies, and so our allies can continue to educate themselves and others, and so we grow to be better people. So students can take a lot out of these readings, especially maybe the lesson plans might not be so interesting for them. But the articles that they show there, and how they link, I always ask them to connect this material with your real life. Where do you see the representation? How can you land this in your life? And then think about, how can I use this? Like the question, where are you from, is very innocuous. If you are abroad, right, and you run into people at an airport, so where are you from, right? But if you go to a bar and then it's like, maybe that's not a good conversational starter. So then it's just like tiny details of how they can inform themselves, become better allies, become stronger in their skills and tools to cope with situations that they may face.
Great. Well, thank you for making this recommendation. It sounds like really great reading. We do have some other materials written and edited by this author, Mica Pollack, in the library. So if you're interested in this or other writings, we have those available in the library too. But my final question for you today is, what are you going to read or watch next related to anti-racism?
I have a long list, but I'll give you, for example, okay. Two books in two movies or films. One is a book from that one of a student, a Goucher alum, recommended. He was my student many years ago, 14 years at Goucher, so yeah, definitely I have some alums. and he wrote in his Facebook page, like, okay, so you should read White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. And he wrote, if you want to read it and don't have money, I'll buy it for you and send it to your house. And then we sit and talk about it. And I was like, oh, that is awesome. So he invited everybody to do that. So I'm going to read it and then talk about it. The other book, it was a recommendation from a colleague, and it's called Dying of Whiteness by Jonathan Metzl. And it focuses on how the politics of racial resentment is killing the US. So these are the two books that are like, oh, I really want to read. And then another colleague suggested I watch 13th. It's a film by Ava DuVernay. It's in Netflix. And it is on the intersection of race, justice, and mass incarceration in the US. And the title of this film is based on the 13th Amendment. I didn't know, like, why 13th? Like, oh, cool. So the 13th Amendment is the abolition of slavery throughout the US. And so I think this sounds like, oh, this is very cool. I didn't know anything about it, so I'm gonna watch that one. It's more feasible and it's quicker probably. And then the hot topic lately, it has been Gone with the Wind, right? They took him off and then they brought it back in. And so the new prologue that was written by this film professor from the University of Chicago, Jacqueline Stewart. And so she wrote the new prologue. And the big criticism of the movie is that the film romanticizes slavery as a benign and benevolent institution. And it became a classic and everything, yes, but with no context or anything. And now that she has written a new prologue with the perspective of today, and it can be analyzed. She is a specialist in film and media studies, so definitely I do want to read that prologue and watch it with that new context added into it. So it does explain, a lot of the time and when the movie was made, etc., etc. So those are like the 4 examples I wanted to share with you, and there are many things. There is also a some podcasts that I've been listening to, and there's a list of podcasts from NPR, and there is one for kids because I have 2 kids. They are 2 boys, and they are Latinos. And as I educate my students, I have to educate my kids and give them the tools. And talking about my kids now, I just remembered one of my younger one came back from school one day when the school was in session. And they were playing dodgeball. And so there was a group of boys who were targeting the girls, and they were saying, this is a boys' game, no girls allowed. And so my kids said, like, this is not fair. You shouldn't be targeting the girls. If they want to play, they can play. There is no boys and girls game. And so he started fighting the boys. And so the boys ended up targeting him too. But I think it was a good example of do something. Like educate yourself and do not allow injustices just to continue. And yeah, maybe they didn't, the girls, they are friends with my kid and the boys are friends with my kids anyway. But at least raising his boys, he is not a girl, but he is an ally. And so that is what needs to be done. The girls were fighting for playing dodgeball, and he was fighting along with them. And so I really like that, that it's very simple for many, but it's powerful at the same time. Because
it's easier to let it go. It's easier to say nothing. And I've seen a lot about that coming out lately too. Like silence is a part of violence. So it's wonderful that you're able to kind of pass these lessons on to your kids as well, and then to actually see it in action. And these recommendations that you made, we do have those 2 books in the library as well, White Fragility and Dying of Whiteness. And I think they're both also on our new Antiracism resource guide on the library website, which also has a link to that podcast that you recommended from NPR. And the 13th, that documentary on Netflix, I watched that last week with my husband, and you will get through it faster than reading a book, but it is very difficult to watch. It's very, very difficult. So just be aware. It's actually not so much about the 13th Amendment as the aftermath of the 13th Amendment coming up until today, and it's really interesting and really eye-opening. And I thought it was a new documentary, but I think it's been out for 2 years already, so that was interesting as well. So I definitely recommend it if you have access to Netflix to watch that as well. So thank you for bringing those up and sharing. I really appreciate you joining us here today and having this conversation. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we sign off for today?
I guess that's about it. But if I can come up with something else, I'll email you.
Sure, be glad to add Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined in live. I'm sure we'll get a lot more people watching the video later. So thank you so much to everyone, and we're looking forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you very much. It was a great experience and an awesome adventure. I like, hey, welcome to the 20-something century. I don't remember which.
Try something new. Yeah, thank you. All right, bye everyone.
Bye. Thank you all.